Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast, where I bring to you the interesting stories of guests from a wide variety of backgrounds. On today's episode, I am joined by my guest who has failed more times than he has succeeded and who has discovered key principles and techniques that have enabled him to build frameworks for achieving many wonderfully impactful outcomes. He is considered to be a world-class leader in the open source movement, holding 8 patents around enterprise software and hardware design, a serial entrepreneur and driver of social change. My guest has founded the Open Source Alliance and the wearable tech company Roar for Good, along with having advised on 4 nonprofit organizations, which include TechGirlz and Drexel's HeForSWE. In this episode, we talk about his journey from engineer to entrepreneur to student of life and advocate for equality in the workplace and empowering women in technology. Before we begin, if you enjoy the episode or show, please make sure to subscribe to the All Things Interesting podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And as always, feel free to follow me on Twitter at TesherCohen and Instagram or Facebook at All Things Interesting Podcast. So, without further ado, please welcome my guest, Anthony Gold. Anthony Gold, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on here. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tesher. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So you're a well-known leader in your industry as an engineer, an investor, entrepreneur, as well as a strong advocate for equality in the workplace. So just to kind of kick things off here, since you have a really diverse background, how would you describe your journey to becoming who you are today? And are there any examples or stories you can kind of allude to emphasize your journey?
Wow, that's a really broad question, and deep as well. So let's see. I started my career as an engineer when I was in high school. Math and science came pretty easy for me. But I actually did not like engineering. I didn't really have an interest in engineering, and I was pushed by my parents to get a degree in engineering. And if I had my druthers, I probably would have studied literature. That's what I really loved, and I wanted to be a writer. And my parents sort of wisely suggested that I pursue a career in engineering, and then I could always consider other avenues once I went through the engineering path. And it was probably pretty good advice. And I went to a really good school at Drexel. And one of the things I discovered while I was at Drexel was how I really discovered the intellectual stimulation of, I won't say engineering in general, I'll say technology and technology-related topics. And really realized that there's so much power, so much potential there, and so much fun that I had while working on that. I was the first class at Drexel to have the very first original Macintoshes. You remember when Mac came out with the big Super Bowl commercial
a bit before
in 1984?
My time, yes.
yeah, no doubt. A bit before many people's time. But yeah, so we were the first class to have Macs, and it was a requirement, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with that, with programming. And it was actually a lot of fun. Actually, quick side story. When I was a kid, every year I would ask for a computer for Christmas. That's all I wanted was a computer. And my family couldn't afford that, but it didn't stop me from saying I would love a computer. And there was a Radio Shack near where we lived. And I remember, probably I was maybe 11 years old, somewhere around there, 11 or 12. And I remember going into the Radio Shack, and they had a computer there. It was a really old, you probably never heard of it. It was a TRS-80, which is one of the very, very early personal computers. And my jaw just like dropped open. And I went in and I said to the salesperson there, I said, "Hey, would you like this computer to, it was around Christmas time. Would you like this computer to display a Christmas tree and Merry Christmas? And they said, yeah, we'd love that. Do you know how to make that happen? And I said, no, but I'll figure it out. And so they let me kind of use the computer, and I actually taught myself BASIC, which was just a really, really basic programming language to do that. And so I sort of knew early on that I enjoyed it. But as I said, I really wanted to pursue a career in literature and writing. But I went into engineering, went to Drexel, and then I started. The great thing, one of the many great things about Drexel is they have a co-op program, and I co-opted with a company called Unisys, which at the time was a huge computer company. They were number 2 to IBM. I mean, $7 billion plus in revenue. So it was a large publicly traded company with, at the time, 40,000, 50,000 employees, a big company. And I enjoyed, as I said, the intellectual stimulation of the field. But what I discovered, Tesher, was that I really loved the business side. And what I mean by that was, why were we making these computers? Actually, Unisys sold mainframes at the time. And mainframes were these, giant, very expensive, multi-million-dollar pieces of iron that companies bet their business on. And I was curious as to why people were buying them. What were they used for? What problems were they solving? And not just technology for technology's sake, but technology to really, have some kind of an impact. And so that sort of, led me to asking lots of questions and doing much more than just engineering, but really taking an interest in the business side and the marketing side and all those sorts of things. But I had a few incidents that during my career that really kind of opened my eyes to my position in engineering, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. But one in particular was, and my career there at Unisys was very blessed. I was very fortunate. I had great mentors. I had great team members. I had just great supporting people around me that helped me advance in my career and helped me learn how to be a better engineer, how to be a better leader, and those sorts of things. And I was promoted up through the ranks to where I was running hardware engineering for Unisys. I was vice president and general manager of hardware engineering for Unisys. And when I was promoted into the role, I wanted to promote my best manager into a director position. And I was told that I could not do that because this person was a woman. And this is, again, many, many years ago, but it still shocked me. There were other factors, but one of them was because she was a woman. And I was so shocked and dismayed by that and really kind of pushed back on that. And she eventually was put in the position, and she did a great job, and she was awesome, and she had a great career. But it was the first time that I really sort of understood or at least got an inkling of what privilege meant and what it meant, how my path as a white male in the technology field, was much easier than others. And these ideas of really recognizing that, not only is discrimination so rampant and the inequality so significant, but that I wasn't even aware of it. And it really kind of started, if you will, my journey of really wondering, what don't I know? These blind spots that I have. What am I not even aware of? The privilege that I have. And so many years later, which we'll talk about later, that's what really sort of laid the foundation for some of the work that I've done in championing kind of the rights of others and recognizing that there's so much privilege that I have that I wasn't even aware of, both as a Caucasian person and as a male in the technology field, that gave me great advantages.
So I think it's really important that you brought up the comparison of being able to be promoted to a managerial role as a female, and that's something we're going to talk about a bit later in the show because I have a lot of thoughts and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it as well. Before we do that, though, You mentioned growing up that literature was a big focus for you. It's something you wanted to go into, but it's not the path you necessarily went down. And for some reason, as of late, a lot of the advice I've been given recently was that you shouldn't follow your passion. You should follow what would primarily give you the most success, and then find a way to be passionate about that. So, do you think that in some ways, and if so, are there any examples that you kind of utilized your passion for literature in engineering as you kind of found your way through the industry that you were in?
Those are terrific questions, and you're right. There's a lot of advice given in self-help books and blogs on this topic, and my perspective is a little bit different. And let me give you my perspective, and then I'll back up and talk about literature specifically. But I think where life is really exciting is when you can find the intersection of these three things. And the three things are what you enjoy doing, what you're really good at, and what the market will pay for. And when you can find that intersection of what you're good at, so you have deep skills in this area, you enjoy doing it, and you can get paid to do it, that's where, I kind of call it the synergy zone. Like that's where things it just feels, when you wake up in the morning, you just can't wait to do what you're doing. Now, the reality is many of us, we don't have the opportunity to get paid to do what we love to do and what we're good at because there might not be a market for it. But I think having that framework or that mindset, if you will, of how can I be developing my skills in areas that I have an interest in where there is a market for that. So I think that framework, can help as a guide, if you will. And so now backing up to me, specifically with literature. So I had, deep interest in literature and writing. I would definitely not say that I was very good at it. I would not say that I had deep skills in it. I had the interest, but I didn't have the skills. And, it's probably not the most lucrative field. However, the flip side is that there are plenty of ways that you can make a lot of money self-publishing, assuming that you build up a following. And the only way you build up a following of your 1,000 true fans, if you will, is that if you have a niche, you have a focus area, that there's, people who have an interest in it. And, the truth is you really only need 1,000 true fans to really be able to build a business around something. And that's not, with 7 billion people, that's not, so difficult to necessarily do. So I think for me, I did not, when I graduated or before I went to college, the opportunity to have a business on the internet and to do those types of things was non-existent. It was the traditional path of you go to school, you get a job for a big company, you work for this company for many years, and then you save enough for retirement, and then you live off your retirement savings. That was kind of the mindset that everyone, except for fringe people that were definitely the minority then went through. But if I were a high school student right now, I don't think that I would take the same path that I took. I think I would have much more looked for that alignment of, what do I seem to have interests around? Where do I think I could develop skills? And where does there seem to be market opportunity? Now, nobody has a perfect crystal ball, but certainly you can sort of see trends, that are happening. And one trend is that if you can help people solve problems, or if you can help people realize opportunities, in other words, if you can make other people's lives better in some way, either by solving problems that they have or helping them helping them make money, helping them get job, whatever, just helping in some way, that's never, that's in a sense, that's sort of recession proof. I put that in quotes because I don't mean that literally, but I do, to some degree. But, if you can think about how you can leverage your interests and develop your skills in a way that can touch people, then you're really you have opportunities that will always be there.
Right.
And whether that's working for other companies, whether that's doing your own side hustle, whether that's building your own services or product company, it doesn't really matter. That focus and that mindset will always serve you well. So for me, the literature interest that I had, I never stopped cultivating that, and I never stopped writing. And so over the years, I developed into my writing improved as a result of just writing and getting feedback. And certainly it's helped me from a communication perspective, and it's helped me from one great way to grow personally. And I think there are many ways you can grow personally, but one way is just to read a lot, and especially to read things that will challenge you, rather than just reading stuff that perfectly aligns with who you are. I think just trying to expand yourself. And certainly having an interest in literature helped me with that. But there's just so much great content out there that can help anybody.
Right. I fully agree on that. I mean, from my own personal perspective, at least, I subscribe to the idea that you should always find a way to be helpful in society, whether it be to yourself as well as to others around you. And on top of that, I think it's critical that people go towards the work that they find themselves doing most. With that said, though, like you said, I think it's also important and critical to kind of get outside your comfort zone, because when you do so, you are involving yourself in different areas that you're not normally used to, but that engage your mind and kind of spark that interest. And I've noticed it a lot reading through your biography, in the sense that you started off working in engineering, but from the challenges you faced and kind of being able to force yourself to branch out, you've gone on to be an entrepreneur, you've done non-profit work, you've worked in a whole variety of different industries, and have had such a strong impact on those around you with your podcast and with your blog. And it just kind of goes to show that despite not focusing necessarily on what you're passionate about, but combining it with 3 different things, as you mentioned, there is a way to kind of put those together and build that passion from that. And my follow-up question is on the topic of mentorship, because early on in the conversation, you briefly talked about it. And I was wondering, was there kind of a characteristic that you found in the mentors you've had that helped inspire you to become the individual you are today?
Yeah, I've had several great mentors and each of them had different characteristics, and I'll talk about that. But let me just back up a minute. And first of all, I want to say kudos to you. I totally agree with your mindset and your philosophy of serving others, and I think it's a great mentality, and it shows through in the work that you do as well, and the initiatives that you have and what you're doing. So kudos to you for doing that. And yeah, I think there's not much more joy that can be had than serving others, and especially if you can serve others in a selfless way. And I put selfless in quotes because there's always a selfish aspect, even if it's unconscious, to pretty much everything that we do, because there's a reason we want to do good. We want to do good because we feel we'd like others to have opportunity. We want to do good because we might feel some sense of lack in ourselves that we want to see that channel through, overcoming that through others. But I think there's just such great joy that can be found in thinking about how can I help other people. And I just want to touch on, for me, I think part of how that got started, and I'm certainly not, I wasn't, I'm not I think I'm not sure I could point to just one thing, but one that comes to mind that I was thinking about when you were talking before the question on the mentorship, which I'll get to in a minute, was I think when I grew up, we moved to a town where we were the only Jewish family in the town. And my parents weren't very religious, but we were in a town where we were the only Jewish family. And in the school, I was the only Jewish kid. And you would think, what difference does it make? And in general, it shouldn't make any difference, except I was teased mercilessly for being Jewish in a non-Jewish community. And I didn't really understand that. I thought, why, I was born this way. First of all, it wasn't something I picked, but even if I had, what difference does it make? But I was teased mercilessly for being Jewish and for being short, because I didn't start growing until I went to college. So high school for me was not, even though academically it came pretty easy for me, it was not necessarily a pleasant time for being teased and picked on so much. And I think that part of going through that sort of built up this idea of, it's, growing up and making your way in life is not necessarily easy for many, many people. And if you can help people, through that, it's not only rewarding, for them and for you, but in a sense, you're kind of, making things a little bit better, or, maybe making the pain a little bit less, if you will. And so for me, it definitely was not a conscious point. There wasn't a point where I said, you know what, because of what I went through, I want to do this. I think it sort of evolved naturally. And it's kind of the mindset of, how would you want to be treated? Well, we should treat others the way that obviously that we want to be treated. So I think that sort of formed, part of that. But there was a tipping point that happened, and it's a really interesting story that I'll share, that because it's so inconsequential and so insignificant, and yet it had such a huge impact on me. And this is what it was. So I described what high school was like. It wasn't necessarily the most pleasant. It wasn't horrible either. I was picked on, but it wasn't like my life was in danger or anything like that. So I'm not trying to, create this massive drama thing. It wasn't that at all. It was, I had there were a lot of wonderful people, but nonetheless, I was picked on a lot. But I was fairly introverted, and developed, a fair bit of insecurity through high school. And I remember going off to college, and obviously I was the same person on day one at university than I was on the last day at high school. But sometime during the first week of college, I was in my dorm room, and I did not know we were assigned roommates, and so I did not know who my roommate was, and we met the first day of school. And our dorm room, we were on the 8th floor of this dorm, and our dorm room was right near the elevator. And as a result, there was always people hanging out outside of our dorm room, out of our door, because the elevator was there, and there was a little like vestibule area there. And there were, at the time that I was at Drexel, there were two places you could eat. There was like the sit-down restaurant, and there was like the cafeteria. And there was plenty of Greek food trucks as well. But as far as like restaurants, if you will, there was a cafeteria and a restaurant. And one day during the first week, people were hanging out of our dorm room. Ray was my roommate, and Ray and I were just chatting, and people were outside, and our door was open. And the people by the elevator were just talking, and there was a whole bunch of people, and they were basically saying, "What are we going to do for dinner tonight?" And it was so uncharacteristic of me, but I shouted out, "We're going to the cafeteria because they have better French fries." and it sounds like, so what, no big deal. But the reason it was so uncharacteristic because I was introverted and fairly insecure. And what happened next, Tesher? It in a sense, it changed my life, because what happened was everyone followed me to the cafeteria. And all of a sudden, I sort of became like the de facto leader of this little tiny cadre of students at Drexel, to the point of, okay, so what party are we going to on Friday night? What fraternity are we going to pledge? And these sorts of things. And it was like, wow, I get to, like, again, I didn't change. I was the same person that I was. But now I get to be a different person. I get to be a leader. I get to be, kind of a person who who decides things for the rest of the group. And what I realized in that moment, although I never would have been able to articulate it then, but what I realized in that moment was that I hadn't changed, but what had changed was a decision I made in my mind on how I wanted to view myself. And I had always viewed myself as this, insecure person, introvert, who was sort of, okay, what the circumstances that happen around me, I deal with that, versus someone, you know what, I could choose to see myself differently. I could choose to have a different perspective on myself, on life. And it was just a subtle mindset shift, but it changed everything. And it allowed me to sort of realize that, and again, I would not have used these words as a young college student, but the old me now can look back on that and say it allowed me to realize that I get to choose the meaning that I give every situation in my life. And I can choose to give it a different meaning. I can choose not to see myself as this, insecure, picked on little kid. I can choose to see myself as, hey, I'm a leader of people. And again, it's physically nothing had changed, but what had changed was this internal mindset. And from that moment on, I realized that, hey, I want to do things for other people, and with other people. And I, in a sense, instantly went from becoming an introvert to an extrovert. Not a complete extrovert, but a big shift. And it was just mindset. So anyway, let me just pause on that, and then I'll come back to the mentorship in a second. But does that make sense, what I'm saying and what I'm describing of this kind of mindset shift?
It makes complete sense. And I hear people talk about that a lot, in the sense of it's always how you choose to perceive and view what is going on around you. It's not what you do, but how you react to certain situations. So if you're in a situation where someone says something that you may perceive to be hurtful or damaging, it's ultimately up to you to choose how to perceive that and how to react to it. So in your sense, from the example you gave, you kind of chose to give it a different meaning and to use that to kind of strengthen your resolve or your perspective on the environment or what was going on around you instead. So from that perspective, exactly. It's kind of choosing and to build your own symbolism of life.
Oh, I like that. I like that term, symbolism. That's a beautiful way to say it. And yeah, spot on. So then coming back around to the mentors, which sort of dovetails nicely, because one of the things with, a key component to self-growth is a willingness to look at your blind spots. Mm-hmm. And, we all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses. I like to call them developmental opportunities. But we all have them, and most of us are pretty well aware of them. We're pretty well aware of what we're good at, and we're pretty well aware of what we're not so good at and where we failed at. But what none of us are aware of is these hidden blind spots, the things that we don't know that we don't know. and I think the biggest mark of self-growth is a willingness to challenge ourselves on those components of what don't I know that I don't know. And you won't get there intellectually. You won't get there even through deep introspection. You might, but it's the easiest way to get there is to surround yourself with people who really have two qualities a few qualities, but two of the most important ones are that they care about you and they want to help you grow, and two, that they have their own ability to have insights and to see things and a skill set that they've developed themselves and honed over the years that help them to be able to do that, because they can then see those blind spots in you, and they have the ability to communicate that in a way that's non-threatening. And I think that's important. I remember when I first moved into leadership at Unisys, and as I said, my career there was blessed, and I was promoted at a very, very young age. And so I found myself as a general manager, at, I don't know, maybe in my late 20s, maybe even earlier. I don't know, but I was very young when I was put into some of those roles. And one of the many things that Unisys did well, there are many things they didn't do so well, but they did many, many things well. And one of them was they really had a focus on developing leadership there. And so I was put into various leadership programs and learned a lot of great techniques and skills and given some great coaches. But one of the great things that they did were these 360 feedback sessions, which this is in the, before that was a very popular, common thing to do. And 360 feedback, you get feedback from the people who work for you, you get feedback from your peers, and you get feedback from your managers, both your direct managers as well as people who are above you, but not necessarily in your chain of command. So they're in other departments and whatnot. And the feedback that comes back and 360 feedback is anonymous, so people say really what they believe because there's no risk of them being found out. And the feedback can be brutal, right? And that's why I say feedback, you have to have people who can deliver it in a way that doesn't put you on the defensive. Because if you're defensive, nothing's going to get through. Mm-hmm. If you're defensive, you're going to justify the negative feedback in one of two ways. Either you're going to say, oh, that's just somebody, I knew who that was, and they're complaining because blah, blah, blah. Or you're going to say, this isn't real. Mm-hmm. This is, what are they talking about? And you're going to miss the opportunity to really say like, ooh, there's something here for me. And so feedback and coaches who can deliver that and mentors who can deliver that in a way that helps you realize, the learning in a non-threatening way can be so, so, so powerful. And it was helpful for me. There were many, many blind spots that I had, and these each year, I would look at those and try to improve on those blind spots. And so mentors were instrumental for making that happen. And when you first asked the question, I had said that, and you had asked about different kinds of mentors. And I think for me, I was also very lucky because I had such a diverse group of early mentors at Unisys. One of them was my HR business partner. Her name was Mary Massung, and she was just a terrific HR person. She still is. She's not at Unisys anymore, but she was a terrific HR director, and she was one of those people who delivered feedback in a way that was both direct and honest, but also non-threatening and helping grow. And a great mentor is someone who can push you, but not push you over the edge, if you know what I mean by that. Yeah. Because you don't want somebody who's going to coddle to you and, oh, Anthony, you're so great. You're in this, great position and so forth. You want someone who's going to push you, but you also don't want someone who's going to be like, you idiot, whatever. Like, what are you talking about? And Mary was just superb at that role. She was very intelligent, very direct, very insightful, very tactful, and very thoughtful. And those are great combinations of a mentor. And because she came from HR, so she wasn't even in an engineering path, it made it even more powerful because, it didn't matter how good an engineer I was. What mattered was how good a leader am I? Mm-hmm. How well was I motivating and inspiring teams, or how was I not motivating and inspiring teams? And so she was one. And then another completely different personality, but hugely as impactful as Mary, was when I started at Unisys, it would have been my boss's 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 boss, who then was, by my late 20s, my boss. He was my boss. And his name was Leo Diudo. And Leo was brilliant. And he's not at Unisys anymore either. He's still brilliant, but he's not at Unisys. And Leo had he had an amazing ability to help you come up. He would have amazing ideas. He would have brilliant insights into the market, into marketing, into product development. But somehow he would find a way to lead you to the idea so that you felt like it was your own idea.
I see.
And then you would run with it. And I have no idea to this day whether this was like a tactical approach that he was consciously aware of, or if it was just a hidden gift that he had. And maybe it was some of both. But he was so good at his gut feel of where things, what would work, and guiding you to that, and having you think it was your own. And the brilliance of that is that we are far more likely to, run with something and to get passionate about something and to get excited about something if we think it's ours. Because there's a sense of ownership, versus if your boss says, I want you to do this. Okay, you do it because you have to do it, because the boss wants it done. But when you're doing something because you think it's yours, and I don't know how he did it, but I always tried to emulate Leo from that perspective of helping people, come up with, stuff that I thought was the right thing to sort of lead them there. But I was definitely never as good as he was. But he had that amazing gift to do that.
Right. Some people just have that innate skill and capability to really just empower individuals around them. Like you said, I like the example you alluded to where he made you feel like you were the one who gave you yourself the idea to pursue that goal. And when that happens, it kind of just gives you the drive to accomplish it. And I've noticed that a lot with a lot of my mentors in the past, and I've had quite a few, one specifically by the name of Adam, one of my prior managers. And I've noticed that they have a very strong knack for being able to communicate and be able to identify the skills that people have and to put them into the right positions to succeed. And I think a lot of that goes hand in hand with empowering that individual, because when that occurs, they're really just matching up their skills with the project that they're working on. And it really just enables them to grow into that and to really achieve the things that they want to. So I think you provide a lot of really interesting examples from the work you've done and those you've worked with.
Yeah, and that's a great, and I like the way that you say that, and it's great that you're surrounding yourself with mentors as well, because it's really the fast path to, personal growth and as well as career success. I sort of think that everybody should not, maybe this is too blanket a statement, but I think it can be helpful to have your own personal advisory board, and almost as if you are a company of one. Mm-hmm. And this is true even if you're working for a company, but picture yourself as as a company. Okay. You are the company. It's you Inc. And you have your own board of directors, and these are people that the characteristics that you described, that they inspire you, they motivate you, and they can help you, and they have a personal interest in helping you grow. And surprisingly, they're not hard to find. Generally, if you see somebody that you think could be a good mentor for you, the best way that you can eventually get them as a mentor is, first of all, to find out, what things matter to them that overlap with your interests, and then find a way that you could serve them in some way. Mm-hmm. And I think that the more that you can do that, then reciprocity naturally kind of flows back when, if you ask somebody, hey, could I, buy you a cup of coffee and pick your brain for 15 minutes? And, mentorship doesn't have to be a very formal thing where you say to somebody, will you be my mentor? Will you be my personal advisor? It's just the ability to develop a rapport with people, to be able to ask them out for coffee and to be able to pick their brain. But it always starts with, what could I do for them? What matters to them that overlaps with what I care about, and, where I could help. And it has to be genuine. You can't try to serve somebody in a disingenuous way just to get something in return. That never works. But when you can find a way that you can do it in a way that's really, genuine and transparent, it always comes back in positive ways. And one other characteristic that I would add about great mentors from my experience, another mentor later in my career His name was John Ryan, and John is another just amazing individual and such great character. He had this mindset of he wanted to create a vacuum over top of each of his mentees so that they could rise as fast as they wanted. And he didn't use this metaphor, but I use this metaphor of he was like, if you've ever been bowling with kids, they have these things they put in the gutter lanes. They put these like inflatable things in the lane so that you can't throw a gutter ball. So if a kid bowls and the ball's about to go into the gutter, it'll bounce off this inflatable thing and come back into the lane so that it knocks some pins down. And I sort of liken John and great mentors to like those gutter bumper guards that they tell you go, they try to encourage you to bowl for a strike, but if you get too far, out of the lane, they're going to gently bounce you back into the lane. They won't let you get too far out of the lane. And I love that metaphor, that image of the bumper guard, because it's not a hard crash. It's just a gentle bounce back and a redirection of the energy. Excuse me. It's not a hard crash. It's just a gentle bouncing back, of the gutter ball, if you will. And that's what great mentors can do, is, sort of bounce you back without, feeling like you've had a hard ricochet, if you will. And that way you can still bowl for the strike, and with the encouragement and the knowledge that you're not going to get too far out of the lane.
I think that's a really strong characteristic of kind of building that sort of comfort zone, but being able to still encourage you and push you in the right direction. And a lot of these characteristics and traits are really what helps build individuals to be competent leaders. I mean, even for yourself, you've mentioned that you're one of the top leaders in the open source movement, for example, and we may touch upon that a bit later in the conversation. One thing I really wanted to kind of direct the conversation to was the entrepreneurship facet of things, because throughout your story, you mentioned that you were bitten by the proverbial entrepreneurial bug. And early on in our conversation,
yeah,
one of the things that stuck out in your story was that you went into Radio Shack and you helped the business program a set of lights of Christmas trees into, I guess, the computer screen, it may have been. And I've noticed that you kind of shed light on a couple of examples that really allude to your entrepreneurial spirit. Do you think this was something you kind of fell in love with at an earlier age, or was it something that kind of triggered later on in your life?
That's a great question. Maybe a combination of both. And I don't want to make the Radio Shack story sound more glamorous than it was, because all I did was just program the computer to display a Christmas tree. I did not program the computer to control an external set of lights. That would have been a really impressive feat of software and hardware, right, that I did not know how to have. But maybe a combination of both. It's interesting. I remember reading a book when I was younger about Bill Gates, and I was very inspired, very, very inspired by that. And I was caught up in the whole Bill Gates versus Steve Jobs sort of, kind of that world and that battle, if you will. And I was both a Apple fanboy as well as a Microsoft user. And so I appreciated both sides, if you will, and enjoyed the battles. And although I'm probably more of an Apple person than I am a Microsoft, but I think that Bill Gates, both of their stories did inspire me to want to, do that sort of thing. And I did have a few ideas for businesses that I wanted to start. In fact, this is so funny. I just shared this story. I taught an entrepreneurship class just 2 days ago in Philadelphia, and somehow the story came up. But while I was at Unisys, in my early days at Unisys, I had an idea for I guess it wasn't too early in Unisys because I had enough of a reputation that I could get a business meeting, which I'll describe in a second. But I had an idea for something that was kind of like Facebook before Facebook. And of course, everybody had an idea for, Facebook. Everyone's got one of those stories. And as, I like to say to many young entrepreneurs who pitch to me that the idea is worth the piece of paper that it's written on. It's all about the execution. Nonetheless, I was one of those people that had an idea for something like Facebook before Facebook. And I had an opportunity to present it to Kleiner Perkins. And the reason I had the opportunity to present it to Kleiner Perkins was because I had developed, I guess, enough of a reputation in the technology world that somehow I could send an email to folks there and get a response to like, okay, let's do a phone call. And I didn't even have a fleshed out business plan. I had nothing but an idea. It shows you how naive and unprepared I was. But this is a funny / embarrassing story that points to, I guess, the entrepreneurship, kind of stuff was there early on. But I was supposed to have this meeting, and it was going to be a phone call. And somehow during the time of the meeting, I was stuck in Logan Airport in Boston, between who knows where I was traveling from or to. And so I was going to have to do the call from the airport. Mm-hmm. And I was in the U.S. Airways lounge, and U.S. Airways that airline doesn't even exist anymore. I think it was bought by American. But anyway, I was in the U.S. Airways lounge, and I'm in a quiet part of the lounge getting ready to do this call, my first VC meeting for my first, official business that I wasn't even prepared for. And meanwhile, I'm still at Unisys. So I'm doing this kind of like off to the side as this exploring this side opportunity thing. And I'm about to start the call, and into the lounge, Tesher, walks Steven Tyler of Aerosmith with his entourage. Okay. And the place is, I don't want to say goes bananas, but it gets very, very animated. And meanwhile, I have to do this call with Kleiner Perkins. And needless to say, it was just this crazy, crazy scene. I don't even remember the call, but I can assure you it did not go well because I wasn't prepared for it. The idea went nowhere. And so a lot of like lessons learned from that. But I bring that up just to sort of, I guess, in response to, I guess I did have that desire to want to build something at a maybe younger age than I had thought. And certainly the Radio Shack story is a good one. But I don't think, entrepreneur now has developed into, a much more of a I guess a positive, inspirational thing that a lot of people want to maybe aspire to. But when I started my career, I can assure you that not only did I not know the term entrepreneur, I would not even been able to spell it. So, because again, starting your own company did not mean, starting small. Starting your own company meant, okay, how can I build the next IBM? And when you think IBM, you don't think quick and nimble and agile and lean startup and MVP and all the things that we talked about today. You think, raising massive amounts of money, buying buildings, hiring people and working on projects that will take years and years and years to develop. So, the antithesis of what entrepreneurship is about today. But nonetheless, yes, I did fall in love with it. And it was, the turning point was building the open source business at Unisys.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I found interesting, and this is just from some research, was that back in 2016, there were around 25 million Americans who started or were running their own businesses. And I mean, putting that into perspective, it really just goes to show that there seems to be some sort of societal shift, at least in the US, where people are going towards pursuing developing their own businesses because of the accessibility we have to large amounts of information. I mean, people can go onto YouTube or
Yeah.
use any of these resources, not to mention open source here, but Khan Academy, for example. People can learn how to code,
Yeah.
and people can just teach themselves how to develop these skills and to start their own businesses. And people are doing it from a really young age. Some people are starting businesses as young as like 12 years old and as old as 60 years old. So one thing that really comes to mind is, do you think there is a big difference between starting your own business at a young age versus starting one later in life in that sense?
What a great question, Tesher. Excuse me. I think there's pluses and minuses to both. I love stories of young entrepreneurs, and I think starting young is great because it gives you you learn very, very quickly that what matters most is not how much you believe in the idea. What matters most is what does the market tell you? And it takes, it's the whole idea of product market fit.
Right.
And a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with never finding product market fit, and they don't find it because they're so attached to their product, their belief of, their gut feel of how things should be, and we just haven't marketed it right, we just haven't, whatever. And I think the sooner that you can realize that the whole purpose of raising capital is to give you enough runway to be able to pivot enough times to find that product market fit, right? Because whatever idea you're starting with, that's not going to be the one that, yes, there's the 1 in a million that is, but let's put that to the side and say for most of us, the idea you're starting with is not going to be the one that's going to hit. And you need to be able to pivot and quickly, respond to the market. But you have to do it in an intelligent way, because the flip side of never finding product market fit are the entrepreneurs who cling to their idea, are the entrepreneurs who just wildly swing every time they get a piece of feedback. Oh, this person said this, we need to move here. Oh, now I heard this, now I have to go this way. Oh, now I heard this. And so that's not going to get you there either. So you have to pivot in a very thoughtful, intelligent way to to find that product market fit. So I think the sooner that you start, the sooner you develop your chops and your experience learning that. Now, the flip side of that is that there's a lot of wisdom that comes with age. There's also a lot of stupidity that comes with age, but there's also a lot of wisdom. There's life wisdom. There's a network of connections that you've built up. There's, karma, if you will, that you've built up. And so, it's a little bit easier because you have more when you're older, because you have more people you can reach out to. You have greater access to capital than you did when you were younger. You have, more lessons learned that you didn't have when you were younger. So there's a lot of benefits to starting something when you're older than when you're younger. So both sides of it I can see. There's no doubt that getting experience through life, and for me, that we talked a fair bit about mentors. I would say, in addition to mentors, my greatest learnings also came from my failures, of which there were many. And I would, and much more so than from my successes, because, we have a tendency when we're successful to overplay our skills in contribution to the success, and to underplay luck in contribution to the success. And so, but in many cases, our success is, sure, there's a skill component, but there's also a big luck component of being at the right time, with the right connector, somebody discovering it, somebody saying something, so like, me, the open source business that I was very fortunate to be a part of at Unisys, timing was you move a couple of years one way or the other with that, and there's no way it's as successful as it was. So there's a good aspect of luck, and I put luck in quotes because to some degree we sort of create that. The flip side of this, Tesher, is that when we fail, we are far more likely to attribute our failures to bad luck than we are to our skills. And so I find for myself that when I can look honestly at my failures and put aside the, oh, well, it was because the market, it was during the recession, it was because I had this terrible partner, whatever it is, versus looking at it and saying, what did I learn? What did I contribute to this thing not working that I can learn from and build from so that I don't make those same mistakes again? And so, as I said, mentors and my failings were for me the greatest learnings that I had for that. And the reason I bring that up is you don't have all the failures when you're younger to learn from. And so, it can be very helpful if you use them in the right way. Now, failure also has a double-edged sword because there's two things that can go wrong with failure. One is that you don't learn the lessons because you don't want to look at them. You just want to attribute them not to yourself because it's hard. None of us likes to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I did not do the best job with this. It's a very difficult thing for anyone to do. But the second reason that failure can cut negatively is that it can also deter us from getting back in the game, from getting back on the saddle, if you will. Like, oh, I don't want to fail again. I don't want to take that risk. I don't want to screw up. And so that's where youth sort of has something of an advantage because there's almost this fearlessness of, what do I have to lose? You don't know what failure feels like. You haven't experienced some of that, and so you might be more likely to take some risks that you wouldn't take when you're older because of the risk of failure, as well as the risk of financial. It's a little easier to take risks with finances when you're younger than it is when you're older, depending on your financial situation and where things are. So, as I said, I can see pluses and minuses to both, but I love stories of younger people just trying to, especially people who have an interest in wanting to make a difference. When I talk to people who have a business idea, one of the things that I like to get a feel for early on is, why are you doing this? And if it's because I want to be the next Elon Musk, I want to make a ton of money, I want to be famous, I have far less interest in working with them than I would if it's, I really want to make a difference. I really, some particular cause that means a lot, and I want to, and here's why it means a lot. And so I personally am particularly drawn to social mission companies. And by social mission, I don't necessarily mean nonprofit, although it doesn't exclude that, but it means a company that has a focus on doing good in some way, having some kind of social impact in some way, shape, or form.
Wow, those are all incredibly interesting points, and I really want to kind of focus real quick on the points you made towards having luck when you're starting a business, being at the right place at the right time, because there's an interesting article by the founder of Y Combinator, Paul Graham, titled "What Startups Are Really Like." And I'm going to pose this question to you as well. But in the article, he basically asks, what surprised startup or CEOs of startups most when starting their company? And a lot of the answers were really having luck, choosing the right co-founder, being at the right place at the right time, having the understanding that your product is always going to continuously change until you hit on that one specific niche that people want to pay for. And a lot of those completely relate to the points you were making. So I really want to pose that same question to you. What surprised you most about starting a startup?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that feedback from Paul, and I can totally relate to that. And it's definitely evolved over my career. When I started my first company, I think I was surprised most by two things. One, I was surprised by how easy it was to raise money because I thought it'd be a lot harder than it would be. And I realized that if you have a very strong value proposition and you can present it in a way that gets people really excited, that you can raising money is not hard. And it surprised me because I had heard so many horror stories, and so many entrepreneurs I know, their biggest struggle is fundraising. And that's one that I never really grappled with because again, the only purpose to starting a company is because you're going to solve a compelling pain point or you're going to create some huge opportunity. And so if you start with that as a given, then your job as the CEO is to, fully believe that and to be able to passionately speak about it and get people excited about it. And so if you can do that well, then raising funds, aren't that difficult. But the other thing that surprised me the most was definitely those same points about, how often you have to iterate to find that product market fit, and how, I trusted my gut a lot when I was at Unisys, and I was very fortunate to create some, really nice solutions there that made a lot of money for the company, and my gut served me very well in those instances. But when I was an entrepreneur, I would have a strong, this product, this feature, this is going to be the one that people are just going to love. And I felt so strongly about it that I thought, of course this is going to happen, because whenever I feel this strongly, it's always been right. And to realize that I'm not right. And not only am I not right, but now the amount of time that I spent going down this path and the amount of money that we spent going down this path is money and time we no longer have to go down a different path. And it wasn't until I stumbled on the Lean Startup, the book by Eric Ries, which came out after I'd already become an entrepreneur, that book just kind of totally whacked me over the head and just changed my perspective on what it meant to build a company and what it meant to be an entrepreneur. And and luck is a big piece of that, and being in the right place at the right time.
A lot of your entrepreneurial work led you to go into the social impact and, in some ways, the nonprofit areas of things. And this is an area that really, really intrigued me about your story, because you started a company called Roar for Good. You're an early advisor and partner for TechGirlz, which was a nonprofit focused on reducing the gender gap in technology operations, as well as an advisor for Drexel's HeForSWE, which was a coalition of men and women advocating for women in engineering and creating a much more diverse tech culture. All of these really, really stood out to me, going back to the early portion of our conversation where you mentioned the struggle for women to kind of get into leadership roles within companies. And I really wanted to get your thoughts on what helped you pursue this direction of wanting to drive social impact for women specifically.
I think it's been a few things as I've kind of grown as a person, but I think it comes back to the whole awareness of your position and the opportunities that you have that other people may not. When my good friend many years ago, my good friend Yasmin, started the Philadelphia chapter of Girl Develop It. Girl Develop It is a national nonprofit whose focus is on teaching women how to code and helping them to be able to pursue careers in technology. And Yasmin started the Philadelphia chapter. A chapter in Philadelphia did not exist. And Philadelphia ended up becoming the fastest growing chapter of Girl Develop It. And one of the challenges that these women who were taking these coding classes were running into was either learning these new skills in Java and HTML and CSS and design and so forth, but they're not getting jobs in these areas. And so Yasmin asked me if I would put together a career track for Girl Develop It to essentially help these women to get jobs in the technology space. And so I agreed to do that. But as part of doing that, I started digging into the research and discovered how, and I sort of knew this before, but it became so apparent to me how significant the gap is between men and women in the technology space, of not just opportunities for being hired, but opportunities for promotion, opportunities for positions in in leadership and executive management positions and board positions. And not just these positions, but also across the board, the discrepancies in salary that women were paid, far less than men were being paid for the same roles. Mm-hmm. And my eyes were just so open to how awful it was that I really thought, this is, I have to, help contribute to this in whatever way I can. And so putting these classes together, one of the classes that I taught was salary negotiation, how to negotiate your salary, because many people don't know this, but if you negotiate just your first job when you come out of college, if you negotiate your salary for just your first job starting salary, and you never negotiated any other job that you had for the rest of your career, the impact of just doing that one salary negotiation at the beginning of your career, it turns out that it would result in about $600,000 to $700,000 difference between how much money you would make over your career. So that's almost $1 million that you're giving up, that you're leaving on the table by not negotiating just your starting salary. And on top of that, women are somewhere between 4 to 8 times less likely to negotiate their salary than men are. And so I kind of looked at those two stats and said, okay, I have to, help contribute to this because, I've been part of the old regime of old white male and executive management roles. And I no longer want to be part of the problem. I'd like to be part of the solution. And so teaching these classes was something that I felt not only did I want it to do, but it's something that we need to do. We need more men in leadership positions to recognize that it's on us to help make a difference, because we are the ones, whether consciously or unconsciously, that have perpetuated the status quo for so long. And so for me, that was a piece of really recognizing that. But another incident that occurred, also coincidentally with the same person, Yasmin, my friend from Philadelphia, was, and this is either shortly after we started Roar, or shortly before, and Yasmin was the one who had the idea for Roar, so I did not start the company. She had the idea, and she started, and she asked me if I would help her build the company. So I joined as her co-founder. Mm-hmm. But it was either shortly before Roar had started or shortly. I don't remember the exact timing, but the two of us were in Philadelphia for some event, and I don't remember what the event was, but we were walking down the street, and it was near Rittenhouse Square, which is just a part of Philadelphia, and we're walking side by side, chatting about who knows what. And the next thing I know, I'm no longer walking with Yasmin. I'm walking by myself, and I'm like, where is she? I turn around, and she's talking to a couple that we had passed, I guess, several feet back. And so I go back, and she's talking to the woman, and she's talking with this woman as if this woman is her best friend. Now, at this point in time, I had known Yasmin for maybe 3 years or so, maybe longer, maybe shortly, a little bit longer. And I knew all of her best friends, and this woman definitely was not one of her friends, and certainly was not her best friend. And then, making matters even more confusing, Yasmin pointed at me and said to the woman, "You remember Anthony? The three of us would hang out together all the time." And that's when it hit me that Yasmin didn't know this woman. She thought the woman was in a situation that she did not want to be in, and Yasmin was pretending to know her to intervene to help try and get her out of the situation. And sure enough, the woman left with us and was thanking Yasmin profusely for getting her out of the situation. And, we presumably, dissolved what could have been a, really horrific situation. Now, here's what makes it so interesting. The couple, as I said, we had passed the couple several feet back. There was no yelling or arguing. He wasn't grabbing her. He wasn't blocking her in any way that was obvious to me. And yet Yasmin sensed, she knew something was wrong. And so she intervened to help get this woman out of the situation. And it really kind of focused me on, wow, how could I not have picked, because I think that I'm, fairly empathetic person, and yet I didn't pick up on it. And so that was one of those blind spots for me, those hidden blind spots of, wow, how much do I not see that's going on like on the streets of Philadelphia, where women are being harassed or worse, and I'm not even aware that it's going on. And I'm not aware not because I am intentionally ignoring it. I'm not aware just because I'm not educated. I'm not aware that I'm not aware, right? That whole thing. And so that really started me on the journey of really digging into the stats of assaults against women and what that looks like and how bad it is for women in urban environments and other environments as well. And once you start digging into the stats, they are ridiculously awful. They're just so horrific that you can't not read them and think this is, as a man, you can't not read them and think, I'm ashamed, that these numbers, that it's this bad, and I'd like to, again, not perpetuate the status quo. I'd like to help contribute to turn this. And so that's what really started my journey on as a male ally, if you will, and the recognition that, allyship is really a journey, that it's not a binary function. It's not like you're not an ally or all of a sudden you are an ally. It doesn't work that way. It's a journey, and we all have different skills and awareness levels, and at the very beginning of the journey is just, kind of the awareness that I had of being aware that you're not aware, right? Being aware of all the assaults and the harassment and the subtle forms of microaggression that go on in corporate environments and all over the place that you're not even aware of. And so that's the beginning of the journey. And then, along the way, just becoming educated and aware and learning, and as well developing techniques for, okay, what can I do? How can I, leverage my position in society, in a company, in my neighborhood, in my, whatever. How can I leverage my skills and my presence, to contribute? And so that's what allyship is all about.
I think the point you brought up about not being aware of your surroundings in some way, or being unaware of the unknowns that occur around you, is very interesting. And I have to ask, in relation to that, why do you think there is such a prevalence still of these sort of microaggressions in society, as well as why do you think that there is such a gap within the work industry between men and women? Why do you think it's so pervasive still to this day, and that there hasn't been a strong level of equality that's been enforced, or a level of respect to this day?
It's a great question. I think there's many components to it, but I think two predominant ones. One is unawareness, and two is the desire to protect the status quo. And let me start with the second one. The second one being that, the idea that, well, I'm in the position of power and I have, I'm getting the good raises and the good salary. For equality to exist, that means less for me. Mm-hmm. So a mindset, I'll call it a lack mindset, a mindset of lack is one. And I'll talk about what I think we can do to address that in a minute. And then the second is what I call unawareness. And an unawareness example is in the early days of Unisys, it was probably maybe 70% male. Maybe that's just a rough swag. Maybe 60. It was definitely predominantly male, but I'm just guessing at the 70-30, 60-40. And it was very, very common for men. And when I say men, these are 20-year-old, 30-year-olds. But it was very common for males to have on their cubicle walls pictures of either naked women or scantily clad women. And it was as common for that as it was as common to smoke in your cubicle. And no one, and I'll put no one in quotes, ever thought there was anything wrong with smoking in your cubicle or having, scantily clad women hanging up on your cubicle wall. Like this idea of, would people be offended by this? And the majority of people, I believe, majority of people who smoked or, hung these things weren't doing it to, I want to annoy the hell out of, or I want to make it uncomfortable for my coworkers, to do this. I think there's just total unawareness, or a very, very huge percentage of unawareness that there was anything wrong with it. Now, we think about if somebody were to smoke in a cubicle, we would look at them like they had two heads. Or if they, wanted to hang, naked women pictures, we would look at them like, what the hell are you thinking? So as a society, we've sort of kind of grown up, if you will, to this sense of awareness and this sense of fairness in some areas, right? I say in some areas, but not in all areas. Because while we might say that it's totally inappropriate to hang pictures of scantily clad women, we don't say that it's totally inappropriate to have salary discrepancy or to have, our board, the diverse mix of our executive team and our boards be so skewed toward a white male, right? We don't yet as a society have that visceral feeling that we would if somebody walked in and started smoking in the office, or somebody walked in and started hanging, naked women pictures. And I think we're moving in that direction in some areas, we're not. So I think that the awareness piece, and that's why I say the allyship journey has to start with the awareness piece. So that's, and I think that one, it will evolve. We're, this country, we're like a battleship that, and what I mean by that is that when you turn a battleship, it takes a long time to turn it. It's such a huge turning radius, and so for us to turn on things that are just wrong, it takes so long. Just look at all the pervasive racism issues we still have in this country. And yes, we've made great progress since the 60s, but from a bigger perspective, we haven't made, it's just so slow. And it's painful, and it's especially painful for anyone who's on the on the affected end, and it's and the people in the privileged position are the ones who don't have to bear the brunt of it. Mm-hmm. And so it takes so long. But I think in general, as Martin Luther King said, the arc of peace bends towards justice, but it takes too long, and what we need is the other piece, which is the piece of how do you get the people in the position of power, the position of authority, the position of benefit, the ones who are on the scale, the bottom part of the scale in a good way, if you will, put the word good in quotes, to say we need to make a change. How do you get the people who are on the boards to say, you know what? I need to step off to create an opportunity for other people, or people to say, I need to give up some of my salary so that we can have more equity. Look at the NFL right now, and you have the owners owning so much a percentage of the income that's coming in. And it's difficult because it's always hard to give up something that you have and that you've grown accustomed to. It's difficult for anybody to do that. But when we take the bigger picture, if we say, well, if we want the players to, take additional risk with more games or whatever the case might be, then we need to, give up more of the salary dollars to make it more equitable. Well, guess what? In pretty much any field you can name, women are just as capable, if not more capable, than men, for, the work that they're performing and the skills that they're doing, and should be paid, commensurate with what their value is to the company, to their contributions to what they're making. But the only way that's going to happen is because in companies you have to to some degree mandate it and kind of push in that direction. So it's going to take leaders to step up and say, I want to be on the positive end of history, not on the negative end of history. And I sort of look at it this way, that, when we're all going to end up in the same place, we're all going to die. And, before you die, do you want to be able to say, man, I made the most amount of money that I could, and I killed it, and I lived, this wonderfully comfortable life, because I was able to take more than my fair share? Or do you want to be able to say, you know what, I made a difference, I helped, create opportunities, and to feel good about the success of others. And I think when you shift your focus towards how you can create joy for others, it's just this, you get the, I think the joy that comes back to you when you do that is magnified 100-fold. And I think helping people in positions of power to realize that, and one way is by getting them to become mentors, and by pushing people in positions of power to become mentors, and not just become mentors, but become mentors for people who are in the underprivileged classes. And I put the word classes in quotes. So in technology, it's anyone who's not a white male are the underprivileged classes. So because I think when you become a mentor, a couple of things happen. You take a vested interest in the success of the person, and you become more aware of the challenges that they have, and you become more aware of your own privilege and the success that you've had and the opportunities that you've had. And so I think it opens your eyes more, just like me creating that class for Girl Develop It, or that curriculum for Girl Develop It really kind of helped open my eyes. And so I think if we can get more people to, push them into mentorship roles, it's going to create this win-win-win all around, because it helps the mentees because they get the benefit of having an experienced mentor. It's going to help the mentors because, as I said, when you help bring joy to somebody else, you get it back, 100-fold. And the third win is that it's good for society, because the end result is going to be these subtle shifts, if you will, in people in positions of power doing that. So I think the more that we can create these mentorship opportunities for those people in those positions, I think is it going to fix it overnight? Of course not. But can it make a difference? I think it can help. Yeah.
I think those are all incredibly empowering points, and I 100% agree with them, especially the part where you mentioned that you could either leave this earth thinking to yourself that you've made a boatload of money and be happy, or that you can give back to society and kind of leave it better than you came to this earth with. And I think that's a big point, because everything is in sort of a status quo where the power is limited to a select few, and the mindset of those individuals might be to keep things status quo in all areas of life, and in this case specifically with the balance of men and women in not only society but in the workplace as well. So I think becoming more aware and becoming more open to different ideas by exposing yourself to different things outside of your comfort zone will kind of help to empower you to understand some of the struggles that people face on a daily basis, some of the challenges that women go through in these environments, and to really find ways to help them, as you mentioned, with some of the work that you've done. And one of the really unique quotes that I found on your website was, "When are we successful? We're successful when women on average earn the same as men. We're successful when equity for all genders and races is the norm. We're successful when there's no such thing as harassment in the workplace." And I think that really resonates strongly, because that encompasses really what we want to see. And you're right in the sense that it's like a large ship, and it's going to take quite a bit of time to steer that ship in a different direction. And it really starts with exposing yourself to these different ideas. It's being aware of what is going on around you, the struggles that people face, the levels of inequality, and just bit by bit, maybe it's the way you react to things. Maybe it's the way that you teach people things. Maybe it's the way you involve others by putting them into leaderships of power or positions of power, by empowering them, by giving them certain roles. It's by doing these small things that's really going to right the ship, so to speak. Now, before we kind of go on to the next topic, I want to ask, what are some challenges that you've personally faced with helping women pursue careers in software development? And what are some of the things on a daily basis that you think people can do to help progress the path we want to see in terms of equality?
I think those are also terrific questions. I think one of them is one of the challenges is the concept of that we need, the idea that saying help women, I don't think that's what we need to do. And I think women don't need help. What we need is society needs help. And so I think shifting the focus away from helping women to get roles to helping companies to recognize why we need to do this, just as one example. And I think we run into the risk of this, and me personally, as well as us collectively, we run into the risk of this, men as heroes to solve the issue of men. And so, this men helping women that's the wrong perspective. Mm-hmm. That leads to the mansplaining stuff that we have, which I am definitely guilty of, and becoming more aware of that. And so I think shifting the focus away from helping the idea or the vibe or the mindset of helping women to helping society, and having the focus be on where the challenges are, and helping create these opportunities. Otherwise, we run the risk of this idea of men sort of, I want to be the guy who, and then fill in the blank. I think having an aspect of an I in there is the problem. Mm-hmm. Is where we run into problems, because then we're going about it for the wrong reasons. We're going about it for the self, the self-indulgent piece of being a hero, versus doing it because it's the right thing to do, and we're in a position that we can do that. And so I think that's one piece of it is kind of the focus on what's being done and why it's being done. So I guess long-winded way of saying keeping the focus on the why, and not letting that get too far away of why this matters and why we're doing it. And just an example, so I'm teaching a class actually tomorrow, a TechGirlz class on this is on building a voice application. So how you build Alexa apps and Google apps and these sorts of things. And I remember looking at the number of attendees, and it was lower than I would have hoped. And my first reaction being one of, feeling disappointment at the numbers, versus disappointment because of the work involved in putting this class on and those sorts of things, versus, wait a second, where's my focus here? Is it on the number of people, or is it on, making a difference for the ones who will be there? And so it's again, coming back to the why, like, what am I doing this for? And making sure that the why, that I stay focused on, for me personally, that I stay focused on the why. And I would say probably collectively as well, that, we don't need men to be the heroes and to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. We need men to recognize that we are the ones who are perpetuating and creating these issues. And so let's look in our own backyard and sort of say, what can I do in my sphere where I've helped perpetuate this to help address it? Versus how can I look good and be the hero here to solve this? And so it's subtle and it's somewhat philosophical, but I think it's important for those reasons, because people don't need help for these particular things that we're talking about. They need opportunity to showcase how good they are.
That is incredibly eye-opening, and it just goes to show how guilty I am of it as well. among others. And to kind of go back to your point, I think a big emphasis needs to be put on the why of why we're doing things, and to not treat it as helping others. But when we look at it from a why, we can kind of see it from the perspective of everyone being as one, instead of people are more so on a balance, so to speak, with one being higher than the other. It's treating everybody equally, understanding where others are coming from, and really emphasizing why are we trying to create this sense of equality in the workforce and in society in general. Before we kind of shift into the closing portion where I list off a few questions to you, I want to just point out a couple of interesting statistics that I found. And those are that only 13% of engineers are women, and only 20% or 26% of computer scientists are women. And female engineers earn 90 cents for every dollar that male engineers earn. So just to put that in perspective, it kind of just shows the imbalance that we're currently facing in the workforce. And I really appreciate you kind of just driving home the challenges that we're facing and some of the things that we can really do to improve and to be more aware and to create that sense of balance that we're sort of missing due to perpetuating the status quo.
For sure. And that 90 cents on the dollar is much better than it has been. So It's still terrible, but it was way worse. It was even worse, I should say. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good to see that it's kind of been improving over time, and hopefully it's something that we can continue to improve on, and hopefully that one day we're going to find that everybody's in a state of equality and balance.
And one way we can do that, so I talked about the mentors, another way we can do that is having more female entrepreneurs, having more women running companies, leading companies, because women running companies, generally, not always, but generally leads to, more female executives, more female board members, and, more equitable salary distribution. However, the flip side of that is a stat you did not quote is the dollar allocation from venture capital to male founders versus female founders on a percentage basis. So I'm not talking about, obviously there's more men attempting to raise money. I shouldn't say obviously. I think the numbers are there are more men trying to raise money than women. But if you look on a percentage basis, investors are far, far, far more likely to invest in male co-founders than they are female co-founders. And many people have heard the story that I've shared, the Roar example, where Yasmin and I, early on in the Roar days when we were attempting to raise money, and we had a meeting with an investor, two folks from one investor firm. And it was a great meeting, and you knew it was a great meeting because you had the vibe that they were getting it, and they're nodding their heads up and down, and everything's great. And then, it's getting toward, the end where we knew it was kind of like, okay, we're going to start talking about term sheet and these sorts of things. And Yasmin excused herself to use the restroom. And while she was out, they turned to me, both male, and they turned to me and said, "We would invest if you were the CEO."
What?
And yep. And so, needless to say, we did not take their money, and nor did we take their money when the company went on to become very successful, and they wanted to invest again, and we said no, thank you. But they are no different than nearly, not all, but nearly all investors that are out there. And again, not to belabor the point, but I don't believe these two people in particular wake up each morning thinking, how can I screw over, women? I don't believe that. I believe that they just don't know. They're just not aware. I believe that there's this gut feel that, well, the man is probably a better leader, and we'd feel, it'd be less risky if he were the one in charge. And that's kind of shifting the mindset, if you will, and that's where the awareness piece starts, because they're not yet at the point where, you, Tesher, you have the reaction if somebody just walked into your office and lit up a cigarette, and you would look at them like, what the hell are you doing? Right? They're not at that point yet where they have that reaction that there'd be any kind of visceral reaction that this would be an inappropriate thing. And so that's where kind of shifting that. But yeah, anyway, completely agreeing with you that the numbers are bad. And one way we can improve it is getting more women running companies and getting more money into their hands, which means getting more venture people and angel people, everyone in the, in the investment world sort of becoming more aware and contributing more. Because guess what? Look at the stats, and you're going to see that minority-led companies, minority-founded companies actually have higher success rates. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of components to that, and we don't have time to dig into it now. But just purely from an ROI perspective, you're better off investing in a minority than you are, a white male company. But obviously, that's a big generalization. But it should at least cause people to step back and think, maybe we need to look at this differently.
And I really appreciate you kind of pointing out these specific examples, because it really gives context to what we're really talking about here and helps to emphasize the incredible impact that changes could have on some of the things that are currently going on in society. Before we kind of end the show, I typically close with a set of quick fire questions, so to speak. And I typically pose these to all my guests, so we'll just get started with the first question here. I feel like
this is like James Lipton in the end of Inside the Actor Studio, where he does these, real quick. What's your favorite curse word? Yeah. All right.
I'm a big fan of him as well, but just to continue here, we all face challenges in life on a daily basis, and these are what enable us to grow as individuals. What advice would you give on navigating through challenges so that they can help you grow?
Recognize that the seeds of every disappointment there are seeds there for opportunity. And I think it's all mindset. And the example that I used at Drexel, just shifting the mindset, how much a difference that made, kind of riffing on that with yourself of how can I change my mindset about this to see this differently?
We live in a time in which we are constantly overstimulated by distractions. What are some techniques people can use to help themselves focus on being more productive?
Time blocking and using some of those time blocks for deep work focus session. And check out Cal Newport's stuff on deep work. It's a great book.
What would you say has been your greatest achievement thus far, and what is something you would like to achieve in the future?
I think I would say my willingness to look within and challenge myself to grow. I think the whole self-awareness and personal growth, and I'd like to continue growing personally and focusing on my own sense of internal peace.
Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned a book, I believe, a moment ago, but what are some of your best resources that helped you along your journey?
Yeah, I would say there are many great books that have touched me. I would say Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl was so transformational for me. And it'd be hard to, there's so many great books that have moved me. So I would say that one from a philosophical perspective. Getting Things Done by David Allen from a productivity perspective totally changed my whole life on how I get things done. And there's so many great productivity books now, but that was kind of the seminal one that started my journey on productivity. And I would say, what others? There's just so many. Lean Startup, definitely. Although, it's a little outdated now, but it was just anything related to that is, from a business building perspective. And I also personally have I enjoy studying philosophical and spiritual thought systems. And for me personally, one of them that I read quite a bit is it's called A Course in Miracles.
One of your podcast episodes was What Makes You Happy? What would you say is your key to living a more rewarding life?
I firmly believe that happiness is a choice and not a consequence. And so for me, I think it's always, you remember if we go way back to the beginning of our discussion today, that idea that we give everything all the meaning that it has for us. Mm-hmm. And so when I find myself in a state that I'm not happy, that I can instantly remind myself that I get to choose the meaning I give everything. And I'll just share, since we brought up Man's Search for Meaning, this quote from Viktor Frankl, which may or may not be his quote. It's mostly attributed to him, but it's a great quote nonetheless, which is that he has this quote, or this quote's attributed to him, that says, between stimulus and response, there's a gap or a space. And in that space is our power to choose how we're going to respond. And in that response lies all of our freedom. And so in every situation that we're in, we get to choose. There's that gap that we can create where we get to choose, how do I want to see this? How do I want to respond? And response doesn't necessarily mean with our words. Response is with our emotions, and that we get to choose our emotions. They're not thrust on us. We get to choose them. And for me, that's really the essence of leading a peaceful, happy life, is that we get to choose it from within. And then what I find is that when we make the choice within for happiness, we create that sense of happiness all around us.
This one's sort of a reference to one of my favorite podcasters, Tim Ferriss, and on some of his episodes, he'll ask this question in a form. If you could share a message with the listeners out there on a billboard, for example, what would you say?
I think I would go back to that quote that I just said, that happiness is a choice, not a consequence.
And then the last question here. What would you most like to tell people that no one ever asks about?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say, I guess I would say, you can learn how to experience joy and happiness in any moment and every moment.
I like that. Very simple, very well put. So, Anthony, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Your diverse background, your diverse experiences, your diverse outlooks on society, navigating life, defining personal success and what happiness is, as well as social impact. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And for those interested in following you or learning more about you, they can do so at anthonypgold.com, where they can also find your podcast, Anthony Desk, and articles on your thoughts on business impact, leadership, entrepreneurship, and more. So again, thank you so much, Anthony, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Tesher. It was a pleasure, and thank you for all that you're doing and for the journey that you're on and for the lives that you're touching. I appreciate it.
So thank you very much. That's the end of episode. Thank you all for tuning into this incredibly insightful interview with Anthony Gold. From finding a mentor in life to developing a framework for development and shifting the way we look at how we view equality in the workplace and in the technology fields. After this conversation, I believe we can do a lot more in the way of being aware as a society and in empowering those around us. I shared this quote during the episode, and I feel it's worth sharing again. When are we successful? We're successful when women on average earn the same as men. We're successful when equity for all genders and races is the norm. We're successful when there's no such thing as harassment in the workplace. The quote really brings together the difficulties that we're currently facing and shows the direction that we are trying to go. it's important to really think about this and strive towards achieving equilibrium in all that we do. So I'll also be sharing a couple of links that Anthony shared during the conversation, and I'll place those in the description of the episode, which is located at teshercohen.com. So for notifications on new episodes or the latest updates, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and follow me on Twitter at teshercohen. Thanks again, and stay tuned for new episodes of the All Things Interesting podcast.